Hello everybody, this is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the Rabbinical Assembly, and Temple of Aaron. Today is the fourth day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 23rd of Tammuz, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Wednesday, July 8th, 2026. We will read Parashat Matot-Masei this coming Shabbat. Let's begin. Parashat Matot-Masei, we're in the first triennial cycle of the Torah reading. We are going to look at the third aliyah today of the triennial Torah reading, which is chapter 31, verse 1 through 12. The Midianite war is finally upon us. This Midianite war was hinted at way before Matot-Masei, in the previous parsha. So we've taken a lot of break to talk about different laws, the census and Pinchas, and now we're finally here. So let's talk about it. The verse begins, Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, God said to Moses, saying, Nikom nikamat b'nei Yisrael me'et ha-Midianim achar tasef et elamecha. Execute the vengeance of the children of Israel and the Midianim. Afterwards thou shalt be gathered to thy people. It is generally understood here that this revenge is against the Midianites for orchestrating with Bilam the whole entire idea of having the Jewish men succumb to the Midianite women so that they can then worship Baal Peor and they can worship their foreign god, in this whole entire scenario of bringing down the Jewish people, not by cursing them, but by making them fall into sin. So this is the time where God commands Moses to now execute vengeance against the Midianites for tempting them this way. Interestingly enough, this is paired also with the idea that Moses is going to pass away right after this. Oftentimes, the many commentators and many midrashim actually compliment Moshe for being so quick about this, to do this mitzvah immediately after God commands it, knowing that he's going to die afterwards. That in the end, a tzaddik, a righteous person, isn't trying to just extend their lifetime, but really is mostly concerned with doing God's command. That's actually what gives a tzaddik, a righteous person, joy. So very important here. That's why the third verse continues, and Moshe spoke to the people, saying, Arm for yourselves men for the army, and let them go against Midian and avenge the Lord on Midian. This verse specifically begins with a kind of strange word, hechaltzu, similar as chalutzim, as the pioneers in Israel were called. Really, it just means be zariz, hurry up, be quick, do it fast. But many commentators also see in this word also arm, and which is why the translation is this, meaning grab weapons to destroy the Midianites and have vengeance against them. It's interesting, though, and I think the commentators note that Moses was quick to do this mitzvah because he adds this word in to the divine command. Right? The second verse is God's command to Moses to do this, and the third verse is Moses' command to actually the Jewish people. So very interesting that he sort of adds this in. Of course, the tzaddik should be quick to do a mitzvah. And so the fourth verse continues, Of every tribe 1,000 throughout all the tribes of Israel shall you send to war. One thing that's interesting about this particular verse, it seems that the pshat, the simple meaning, is that there's 1,000 from each tribe that's sent, but there's an interesting midrash also that the Levi'im are also included in the army here, which they're usually not. And the general idea of this is that, at least in according to one particular commentator, that in wars of territorial conquest, the Levi'im are not included in the army. But in wars of divine battle, that is commanded specifically by God, what would be called a milchemet mitzvah, or an obligatory war, even the Levi'im should be included. Very, very interesting here, idea of a sort of a division of labor. It's also interesting to note, before we go on, that this is specifically about the Midianites and not about the Moabites. Why not the Moabites, right? We know that actually the original plan came from the Moabites. It's according to Rashi and according to the understanding of many of the great medieval rabbis in the commentary tradition, is that the Moabites were actually seen not as bad as the Midianites. The Moabites decided to attack the Jewish people and curse them by the way of Bilam, not because they wanted to destroy the Jewish people, but because they were genuinely afraid that they would be plundered and taken over and conquered by the Jewish people. And so, therefore, they're given compassion. and unlike the Midianites, who just wanted to join a war and just wanted to fight and cause trouble to the Jewish people, and so they're treated much more harshly. It's also considered that the Midianites were the ones who actually planned with Bilam the whole entire Midianite women whole issue. There's also another interpretation that the reason the Moabites were spared this sort of punishment was because Ruth the Moabite would eventually come from the Moabites, who is the great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of David HaMelech, and was a righteous convert. And so because this great Tzadeket came from Moab, the whole entire nation was treated more gently. And actually this is prescribed within halacha, in which we are not supposed to harass Moab too much because this righteous woman came forth from her. I think the bigger message here is that people should not be defined as just the people in itself, but by even the few righteous people that come out of it is liable for saving an entire people. That's the power of a righteous person, both man or a woman. The verse continues and says in verse 5, so there were delivered out of the thousands of Israel, 1,000 of every tribe, 12,000 armed for war. And Moses sent them to war, 1,000 of every tribe, them and Pinchas, the son of Eleazar the priest, to the war, with the holy instruments and the trumpets to blow in his hand. The idea here, one thing that's interesting that's being shown here is that in every military that went out, a Kohen would be sent out with the military. This time, interestingly, Pinchas was sent. And a lot of the commentaries say, why Pinchas specifically and not Eleazar, the high priest? Well, because Pinchas was the one who started this whole thing, right? Started the vengeance by killing Cosbi and Zimri, as in that, which of course happened at the end of Parashat Balak and the beginning of Parashat Pinchas, and so he's supposed to finish it now. And it's this general principle that if you start a mitzvah, you should finish a mitzvah. Pinchas is going out. Why do they need a priest in war anyway? This is actually an idea that a priest there always must be a priest that goes out with the military, that anoints, they are to be anointed, and to actually give sort of an inspiring talk to go out to tell them that God is defending them and fighting them before the troops go out to battle. This is illustrated and inscribed in Parshat Shoftim in the book of Deuteronomy. We also see that he goes out with holy instruments and the trumpet to blow in his hands. Most commentators, at least Ibn Ezra, at least says that the holy instrument is the ark itself, would actually go out with the Kohen. Verse 7, and they warred against Midian as the Lord commanded Moshe, and they slew all the males. So they go out and fight. They slew the males. Most commentators say this is just males above of majority age. Verse 8, and they slew the kings of Midian, beside the rest of them that were slain, namely Evi and Rechem and Zur and Hur and Reva, 5 kings of Midian. And of course we see Zur here, who's actually the father of the famous Cosbi. So not only Cosbi was killed, but so too was her father. And one of the ideas of this that's very famous is that why are these kings each said separately, their names, and then it says 5 kings. It could have just said, Rashi says it could have just said just the names of the kings, and we could have counted that it's 5. And that's the reason, because these are all separate people, but because they took all advice from Bilam and they all acted together, they're all considered together. So that is an important, I think, message, that when we all take the same advice, we almost become one. Even though we're separate people, we almost become one in that way, and which is why it's so important always to keep an independent mind. And of course, lastly, one thing that's important in verse 8, then finally Bilam, also the son of Beor, they slew with the sword. So finally Bilam gets his just due. He gets killed. One of the beautiful midrashim that comes out of this that I really, really love is that because Bilam stole the weapon of the Jewish people, which is usually not the sword, this usually belongs to Esav, but instead used his words by trying to curse the Jewish people, and that's usually the weapon of the Jewish people, prayer and Torah study. In this case, what did the Jewish people do? They stole the nation's weapon, which of course is war and physical fighting, and they slew Bilam with the sword itself, and they, in doing so, gave Bilam his just due for trying to steal the weapon of the Jewish people. I think that was a pretty cool idea. So I just really enjoyed that. And of course, Bilam gets his comeuppance. Finally, and the children of Israel took all the women of Midian captives and their little ones, and took the spoil of all their cattle and all their flocks and all their goods. And they burnt all the cities in which they dwelt and all their encampments with fire. And they took all the spoil and all the prey, both of men and beasts. And they brought the captives and the prey and the spoil to Moshe and Eleazar, the priest, and the congregation of the children of Israel to the camp at the plains of Moab, which are by Yarden near Jericho. So we see that they take booty. They take the women captives and the children, as well as the livestock as well, alive, and bring it to Moshe and Eleazar. One thing that's noted about this that's particularly exemplary, at least, is that they didn't steal anything. They didn't take any of this for themselves. They brought all of it, the verse says. They brought it all to Moshe and Eleazar, meaning that they didn't let their guilt. It's usually thought that these 12,000 soldiers were the pick of the crop, very, very righteous people, and for doing this. So we'll see how Moshe and Eleazar reacts to this all tomorrow. Mishnah Torah. We're going to turn to the laws of Kriat Shema. We're in chapter 3, verse 8 and 9, and we get to talk more about poop today. Wonderful. All right, let's get into it. So today we're going to talk about how much we have to distance ourselves from excrement or urine, and what is the halacha with this. Okay, so it begins. Rambam first says, how far must a person distance himself from feces or urine in order to recite the Shema? This is the question we're asking. And he states 4 cubits. 4 cubits. That one has to be at least 4 cubits away. So this is, of course, specifically in the case in which you can't smell the excrement or urine. So if you go 4 cubits away, 4 cubits are about 6 feet or so, then you're okay as long as you can't smell it. But if you're 4 cubits away and you still can smell the feces, you still have to go further. You can't have the bad smell. Throughout all of this, what's important is there's you can't see the feces or urine, nor can you smell it. Okay, these are important things that both need to be fulfilled in order for one to be able to properly recite the Kriat Shema. So he gets into this a little bit in detail. He says this applies when they're at his side or behind him, but if they're in front of him, he should move until he cannot see them and then recite the Shema. So this actually is a Mishnah and Gemara within Brachot itself. This is actually designated within the Talmud, that if the poop is behind him, right, so that he can't see, then that's what we're talking about. 4 cubits, that's enough. Okay, so even if he can't see it, but he's only 3 feet, it's only 3 feet away from him, there's sort of a proximity that it's in his personal space. That's usually the meaning of what the 4 cubits are here. It's just generally believed to be sort of someone's personal space within halacha. So it cannot be in his personal space, and it certainly can't. And even if it's that far away, it can't smell, as we talked about. But even if it's in front of him, so that he can possibly see it, this is not okay, and he has to distance himself until he can no longer, or she can no longer, see the excrement any longer, and then they can daven and recite the Kriat Shema. Now, the interesting question, of course, is the sides. The commentators are a little bit perplexed about where Rambam got this idea of the sides from, because the sides are a little bit of a complex question. The Mishnah and the Gemara actually never talk about the sides. They only talk about the front and the cases of the urine or the feces being in front of one or in back of a person. But what about the sides? Well, what they basically say, Rabbeinu Manoach actually challenges sort of a Rambam on this, and because Rambam seems to be coming through Sfeira, through logical assumption, saying that if it's on the side, one can treat it like it's behind one. But actually, logically, one might actually interpret the opposite. He says from the case of a bent lulav, in the case of a bent lulav, that's the thing we shake on Sukkot, if it's bent forward, it is considered pasul, it's considered invalid, and we can't use it, while if it's bent backwards, it's considered kosher. And in the laws of a lulav gazul, at least what the halacha tends to be, a lulav that is bent, at least in what the halacha sort of comes down to be and becomes the accepted opinion from the Gemara, is that if it's bent to the side, then it also is considered pasul and it's treated like being forward. So he compares the two cases and says, so too in our case, if in the case of lulav, the side is being treated like the front, so too in our case, the side should be treated like the front, not the back. So why is Rambam sort of making this logical jump? Rabbeinu Manoach then answers his own question. This is all quoted, at least in the Kesef Mishnah, one of the great commentaries on the Rambam, that says specifically what he means here, or at least an understanding of sort of squaring all these sources together, is that the best thing to do would be to remove oneself, right? So that if the poop is on the side, the best thing to do would be to remove oneself so that it is behind him, so that he can't see it. But in a case when you can't do this, for some reason you can't make the poop behind oneself, it is considered acceptable to recite the Shema even if it's on his side, and one can treat it like in the back. So he basically makes it a b'diavad case, an after-the-fact case, and this again is Rambam trying to create more room in the leniency within the halach here, so people can recite the Shema easier. This was very much lamase and practical halacha for people who lived in the time of the rabbis, although it still is practical for us today as well. The ninth halacha: when does the above apply? So he's applying to he's saying when does what apply? When does the rule we just discussed, right? About the 4 amot. He says when he's in an enclosure with them and they're on the same level, meaning when one is in a building, in an inside place with them, and they are in the same elevation, right? The person and the poop or the urine are in the same elevation. However, if they are 10 handbreadths higher or lower than he may sit next to them and recite the Shema since there is a space separating them. Right, so actually, if there's a 10 tefachim difference, a tefach is usually about a half a foot. So you can probably just in just a gross estimate say about 5 feet, right? So if this excrement or urine is lower or higher in terms of 5 feet than where you are, you can then technically say the Shema, again, as long as you don't smell it, which is what he's about to say. The above applies provided no foul smell reaches him. And other commentators actually say as long as you can't see it either. It's actually a disagreement between the Rashba and the Rosh, two other later commentators and rabbis, great rabbis, halachis. The Rosh says actually it is acceptable to see it, even if you're 10 handbreadths apart, while the Rashba says you can't see it even if it's 10 handbreadths either below or above you. Most of us go by the Rashba, which just makes sense. You shouldn't be looking at poop when reciting the Shema. Come on. Continuing on, though, similarly, if he were to cover the feces or urine with the vessel, it would be considered as buried, even though it would still be in the room, and it is permitted to recite the Shema next to it. So we can actually just cover this is actually brought in the Gemara itself, the idea of putting some kind of bowl or something over the poop or the excrement, burying it so we can't see it. And of course, again, this is all in the case of we still can't smell it, right? If we smell it, it's still a problem, even if we can't see it. So very important. Menorat HaMaor. We'll continue learning this chapter, this portion on the idea of tshuva and affliction's role in it, especially specifically in terms of the affliction of the nation as a whole. So we learned yesterday about the importance that the world is sort of created for tzaddikim, even when there are, God was willing to sacrifice, even though by creating humanity, even knowing that there would eventually be wicked people as well, that it's worth it because of the righteous that would come out of it. And that's how important to God righteous people are in general. We're going to learn more about these righteous today. What do we mean by these righteous people? So the Menorat HaMaor continues on. It's found that the intention here is for the sake of the righteous. Shem Yisrael shekiblu the Torah. What do we mean by tzaddik here? Meaning, tzaddik is a Jewish person who receives upon themselves, that the Jewish people, that they received upon themselves the Torah, and they suffer afflictions and galut and exile in order to atone for their transgressions and to afflict their bodies. Okay, so what is being said here, and it's interesting, he's really talking about the nation, not as an individual tzaddik, he's really talking about the nation of the Jewish people as a whole. That one thing that they do that makes them so righteous is that they suffer afflictions. Now, it's important to note the word that's being used here for afflictions, yisorin. Yisurin comes from the word musar, often used as a modern spiritual movement for ethical perfection, right? Of making oneself better through a close examination of oneself. The original meaning of musar here, though, is discipline, right? Sort of suffering for discipline. Like, we have a different word for just suffering for the sake of suffering, which is sarot, tsuris, as your grandmother might say, right? That's just suffering. Isurin is purposeful suffering for the sake of discipline. So I'd like to translate it that way. So the Jewish people suffer disciplining and suffering because of discipline, and exile as well, because this atones their transgression, and it's a belief that these things, disciplining oneself and exile, atone for our transgressions that we do, and also they afflict our bodies. There seems to be a general idea at this early period that afflicting one's body in itself is a good thing, because then one becomes more spiritual. Now this, of course, is only in measure, right? This is not make yourself sick and everything like that, but it's just to not focus so much on bodily pleasures and physical pleasures, but rather on spiritual pleasures. And the proof text he brings for this is Gedarsinan Hatam Beperek Chelek. Now, it says Perek Chelek here, but that's actually a manuscript error. It's actually from the Midrash Rabbah, Bereshit, and specifically Midrash Rabbah Bereshit 9:8. Thank God for the Mosada Rav Kook version of this that was able to fix this mistake, because you're not going to find this in Chelek, which Chelek is the final chapter of Masechet Sanhedrin. So in this Bereshit, it goes like this. Bereshit Rabbah goes like this. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, V'hine tov meod. What is the tov meod he's talking about? The tov meod he's talking about is when God creates humanity and says, and this is very good. And it was unique, as we talked about yesterday, that the man is the only creation that's called very good. And the interpretation that Rav Huna brings here of what tov meod really means is zo midat yisurin. This is the attribute of disciplining afflictions that discipline oneself. And so very stunning sort of idea that, like, how is really, like, suffering through discipline is the really good thing about being a human being. That's not the first thing I would put on the list necessarily. And that's exactly what the Midrash says. V'chi tova me'od atmaha. Right? This is surprising. How could Yisurin be tova me'od? And it says and continues, that by way of sufferings of discipline, the creations come to Chaye Olam Haba, they come to the world to come, they are able to enter the world to come, the world of eternality, the world of the spirit. And this makes sense, right? We discipline ourselves. When we discipline ourselves, we become better human beings. We perfect ourselves, we make ourselves better, and by taming sort of our lusts and our urges and all these sort of physical passions, to sort of carve ourselves towards doing the good, doing the righteous, doing what God wants out of us. And that, of course, brings us to a world of eternity, a world that is truly eternal and not based on temporal pleasures. And so to Shlomo HaMelech, Solomon the king says this in the book of Proverbs, which he supposedly wrote according to the rabbis in Proverbs 6:26, that the way of life, what the rabbis are actually using this as eternal life, is tochachot musars, rebukings of musar, or afflictions, ethical disciplining afflictions. Right? This enables us to actually gain life, to actually feel life, to actually be in this world. We need to discipline ourselves as human beings, and obviously, immediately, that what that feels like often is affliction and suffering. But that's what enables us to get to the world to come. That's what enables us to live in a world of eternity, which is said over and over again here, and of course is the way in which we should picture sufferings and galut and exile, all the sufferings that we experience as a community, that they actually help build us and make us the pinnacle of what we should be, what God dreams of us to be, and actually the reason for existence in itself, to be righteous, to be a righteous people. So very, very important here, and a very timely message. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.